Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Ukrainian show on POT TV. My name is Sasha Star, and I have distinguished guest today, Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you always. And I've heard very interesting commentary yesterday about the Russia-Ukrainian war. And essentially, message was that whether you call it a special operation or a war, and even Putin sometimes he calls it one way or another. Now, the thing is that for a special operation, there are just too many deaths on both sides. And therefore, it is, you can call it any way you want it, but it's nothing but a real war. And with the sacrifices on both sides, specifically Russian side as initiator of this war, how they can justify to their people the loss of now well over 300,000 people. This is becoming now the most important issue because, okay, you will have yet another 10 meters of territory, or you will lose 10 meters of territory. It's becoming so immaterial because how much progress Russia made in the last several months. Let's see, they're attacking in Avdiivka and they're losing about 1,000 people a day. And what did they have achieved in that Avdiivka so far? And even if they will take Avdiivka by losing another 50,000 people, how it matters really? What do you think, Jonathan?
Well, I agree with you on that score, and the cost is increasingly, even though the some commentators believe that Russia has all these vast resources, those they have to qualify that those resources are declining in quality with every passing day. And there other commentators have noted that Russia's production capability is not necessarily able to keep up with the requirements of the long war that Putin is advocating. And, and you'll notice also that Zelensky has pointed out that one of the goals for 2024 is to sever control of the Crimea from Russian control. And that is becoming an increasing number of commentators are catching on to the fact that Ukraine is able to increasingly restrict supply and reinforcement from Russia to the Crimean Peninsula, and that, as I've been advocating for months, that this is the key center of gravity for this conflict. That if the Ukrainians are able to sever control of that link and isolate the Russian forces in Crimea, and thereby setting them up for a successful Ukrainian ground counteroffensive using Ukraine's strategic reserves into the Crimean Peninsula, this will be a significant enough operational defeat for Russia that they won't be able to disguise, and that will set the stage for successful negotiations to get a theater-wide armistice, which gets Russia out of Ukraine altogether. And I would say, contrary to the majority opinions, that Ukraine has a real chance to achieve victory on the battlefield during this calendar year, and that they could quite possibly render the presidential elections in November irrelevant.
Exactly, because what Putin is betting is on the return of Trump to the White House.
And that's not a sure thing. That's not a sure thing. It's not a sure thing on either count. It's not a sure thing that Mr. Trump is going to be reelected, is going to be elected, or it's not even a sure thing that even if he is elected, that he is automatically going to take Russia's side. He didn't take Russia's side together when he was in office the first time. He wasn't Russia's friend. Russia didn't dare attack while he was in office. So Mr. Trump is capable of quite a few surprises. And just as the Ukrainians are capable of surprises, the Ukrainians believe that Mr. Trump is someone they can work with. So there's some very interesting backplay going on behind the scenes, which we're not totally aware of. The mistake that a lot of the Western media makes is that they assume that what they see is all there is. what they see, that there's no secret machinations going on behind the scenes that they're not totally aware of. And history of warfare in this century and in the previous century prove that usually there are a lot of things going on behind the scenes that we are not aware of.
Interestingly enough, the so-called real politics with Professor John Mearsheimer, for a long time, their message was that U.S. got it completely wrong, all this Russia-Ukrainian affair. They should be on the side of Russia, as Russia is a real superpower, and to get Russia away from China, which is a main enemy of the United States. So U.S. has to be friends with Russia. And whatever happens in Ukraine, it's a local issue and Russia will sort it out or so on. But the main thing is the United States have to be with Russia. Now, strangely enough, lately, he's not delivering this message anymore because, first of all, it's very unclear what makes Russia a superpower, that they are fighting for Avdiivka now for
Boris
6 months.
Yeltsin could tell you that. Boris Yeltsin said it all very clearly in a speech to the Russian Duma in 1994, when he said that the only reason Russia is considered a great power is because its armed forces have nuclear weapons. That is as clear and honest a statement as you're going to get. And one of the previous Russian nuclear ministers of defense, I forget his name offhand, back in 1991, was saying that the nuclear forces, the former Soviet nuclear arsenal, belonged entirely to Russia. And he said it was one of the forces cementing the Russian Federation. That tells you just how important the nuclear forces are, both politically, militarily, as well as for exerting leverage against the West. So that, by the way, is also why the Russians fear, even though they won't come out and admit it as much, why they fear the potential of the United States and the NATO allies to create a global ballistic missile defense that would neutralize the one factor that makes Russia a great power in their own perception.
And that will be the end of all this conception of a great power of Russia.
Right,
And
exactly. Just
special-
neutralize the nuclear arsenal, and that's the end of these other nations' pretensions to great power status. If the U.S. and NATO combine to create a global ballistic missile defense system using the factors that I've mentioned previously, then all of this argument about who's a great power and who isn't comes to a screeching halt.
Absolutely. So this is what I mentioned on a previous show, one of the previous shows, is that American policy towards Russia is very much Moscow-centric. They are treated Russia as same as the Soviet Union, and all these other republics, one of them being Ukraine, are nothing but kind of a geographical nonsense. That, okay, it's there, but maybe in 10, 15, 20 years, it's not going to be there any longer, and Russia will absorb sooner or later all these little republics and Stans and Uzbekistans and all others, and it will be back to old days of the Soviet Union. And you know, Jonathan, so far it's not happening at all. Actually, Russia is bleeding. Forget about superpower. It's not even a normal country anymore because with losses, you know, it's not China or Indonesia. It's the loss of well over 300,000 people. You know, it's sometimes the quality is becoming the result of quantities. You know, if they would lose 20,000, 80,000 people or so, okay, it's unfortunate, but it's now becoming almost unparalleled loss of lives, of manpower, of you know, how many families have losses of their
it's going to be and the after effects of this, once the war grinds to a conclusion, the after effects of this are going to be felt demographically by Russia in future years as they deal with the consequences of this great loss of manpower. The loss of manpower in World War II had a significant effect, which compelled the Soviet Union to rely so heavily on nuclear weapons in an effort to make themselves equal, because otherwise they had severe problems keeping up economically, and demographically with the West, and
Yeah,
their problems
demographically.
are going to grow even more now.
You know that until recently, the statistics were that there are almost 60% of women population to about 40% of men's population. But few years after this war, hopefully will be over one day or another, I think it would be more 65 to 35, maybe even 70 to 30. And even this 30 or 35% of men's population, half of them are drunk, half of them are impotent, and means there is nothing really to talk about it.
Yeah, unless the Russian government adopts a policy making polygamy, having a man can have more than one wife. Yeah, yeah. Of course, a Mormon missionary once asked the humorist Mark Twain to point out a verse in the Bible that said that a man could not have more than one wife, and Mark Twain's sarcastic reply was, "No man can serve two masters."
That's a good one. Well, listen, this is it's too early to predict, but I think they will have to make polygamy as a law because, again, it's not just numbers like 30 against 70s for various reasons. Alcoholism is number one. Uh, there will be indeed 1 out of 10 men who will be able to get women pregnant. And then we're moving very quickly to
They're going to be
uh,
awfully busy. They're going to be awfully busy men.
Wow, we are moving into the Dr. Strangelove scenario. Remember when Dr. Strangelove advised how to sustain the human life for next 93 years, which will take time to get all these radioactive elements out of Earth. I think it was Strontium was the strongest one that would survive 93 years after atomic explosion. And so he advised, so you have to select uh, 10 men for 90 women. And this general, he started to show to himself, oh, I'm the one for sure. So whether Russia will move to that scenario, we'll see.
It should be amusing.
Uh, I think that probably all that is based on the cult of personality of Putin himself. And I think sooner or later, I hope he will be out of power in Russia for various reasons. I don't know which one is first, second, third, or so on. There are several scenarios. And regardless who will come to replace him, he's not going to be right away as popular as Putin is. Although you can trust the numbers that he is popular among 80% of population or so, but the whoever
Every
will
time I
replace.
hear yeah, every time I hear statistics like that, I hear that again. I'm reminded of what Mark Twain once said that there are three kinds of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics. So,
Yeah, statistics is probably
the
by
worst
far
kind of
number
lie.
one. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, a lot of people questioning these numbers, like 80% or so on. In reality, I don't think that he has even 50%, maybe much less than that. Because I'd like to find out what do you think who is a beneficiary of this, whether special operation or war. So who in the Russian societies are beneficiary of that? Very few people, if you think about it. The masses of people who are taking all their losses in life as a lot of it's now becoming almost times of Second World War where a lot of women were working for 16, 18 hours a day on all these war factories producing the enormous amount of tanks and artillery and so on. So is Russia moving to that direction when they will use
They're being
women
forced
and
in that. They're
children?
being forced in that direction, Sasha. They don't have much of a choice, and they are going to face a post-war collapse once. And that is again that is why the current military developments, potential developments this year are so very critical. And yeah, I am anticipating the Ukrainians delivering. We're seeing hints of it in the tactical developments, the introduction of new aircraft, the innovative ways that the Ukrainians are finding to inflict damage on the Russian Black Sea Fleet and in operations in general, and in thwarting any attempts at Russian counteroffensives. So we're seeing all these little incremental developments that, to me, in my perception, they are adding up to setting the stage for a decisive Ukrainian counterstroke that will totally disrupt Russian plans for taking over Ukraine and setting the stage for a potential negotiated peace, a compelled negotiated peace, one that is forced upon the Russians by a significant operational defeat. And people are increasingly coming to recognize that the operations in Crimea are the decisive focal point of this whole operation.
There is something else. As much as Ukrainians are motivated and they're getting better and better to inflict considerable damages on the Russian army, the Russian army is becoming very demotivated. There are cases when they are not following the commands, not only soldiers but officers as well. There are cases when they are getting out from the front lines and hiding in forests and anywhere else simply as means to save their lives. They don't care anymore about giving up their lives for Putin and his ideas. They want to preserve their lives as much as they can. And to do that, they have to leave front lines. And of course, they have to do it with a certain risk of being caught and so on. And but they prefer that rather than just go face to face with the Ukrainians, who are much stronger physically, and they are much more motivated than Russian soldiers, and they're avoiding face to face conflicts and fights by all means.
Well, the attitude of the Ukrainians could be compared to the attitude of the Confederates during the American Civil War. As Northern soldiers, the Yankees would ask a captured Confederate soldier, "Why are you fighting us?" And the Confederate soldier replied, "We're fighting because you're down here.
There's no one else."
Yeah, get out of here. Yeah, the war will be over if you just get out and leave us alone. And that sums up the Ukrainian attitude. We're fighting because you're here. Get out.
So you see, the Russian misfortunes are in Ukraine. They reverberate with their posture as a leader of this axis of North Korea and Iran, China probably. Although China is, from what I see, becoming much more reserved in what they're doing and what they're saying. Did you notice that lately China is becoming, first of all, they have huge economic problems, as much as people are saying that they're a threat to the United States and so on. They have huge economic problems and very unclear how they can get out of it.
Contrary to what Dr. Mearsheimer has been saying, he says, neither Russia nor China are our friends. However, neither are they the powerhouses that are going to overpower the United States and the West, because that realistically, what the United States needs to do in conjunction with its NATO allies is to act as a geopolitical balancer to prevent and discourage any further aggression by either Russia or China, or by extension North Korea or Iran. Just keep them from achieving through military conquest what they cannot otherwise achieve through any other means. And the West will be able to preserve the peace and be able to promote prosperity within its own sphere. And eventually, if the let's see. I just saw a little question pop up. Yeah, well, from our friends off screen. He said, "What do I think of the nuclear testing from North Korea?" Well, North Korea is essentially doing the lesson that they have been learning, is that possession of nuclear weapons provides prestige. People notice you more when you have nuclear weapons than, if it were not for having any kind of nuclear capability at all, they would be North Korea would be considered irrelevant. And so what they are trying to do is parlay their what little nuclear capability they have into a means of leverage, much the same way that Russia and China try to parlay their possession of nuclear weapons into political influence and leverage. So realistically, yes, I hate to sound repetitive, but if we have the clue with the successful employment of Patriot, which the Russians fear a great deal, and they have reason to, and they fear the potential of the technology of the West to eventually create that global ballistic missile defense system, which neutralizes all of their nuclear arsenals. It solves a number of problems with just one straightforward means of asymmetric military response. Not symmetric. The answer to their nuclear arsenals is not to build no more nuclear weapons. It's to build effective anti-ballistic missile defense.
Well, about North Korea, I have my own theory. I have a theory of short man syndrome. If you remember in history, all these great leaders such as Genghis Khan, Napoleon, Stalin, Putin now, they're all Hitler too. They were all basically short men, and they had
what a bunch of overcompensators.
Obviously, the one that compensates themselves. Now, since 1953 until today, on average, North Korean, or actually South Korean, become on average 5 centimeters taller than their North Korean counterpart.
Superior diet, superior, yeah.
Yeah, they have communist diet, and South Korea has capitalist diet. And it seems to be this capitalist diet, man, becoming some sort of taller than those on communist diet. Now, speaking about that, I really can't. I mentioned Napoleon was short too. I saw the movie Napoleon, actually. It's quite fascinating. And so I think that North Korea, they cannot find any satisfaction to attack South Korea being defeated. The only one good thing may happen is that there was the end of North Korea. Same as Eastern Germany ceased to exist very soon after the Berlin Wall fell. That was the end of East Germany. And I think same thing will, one way or another, will happen to North Korea. And I don't think that North Korea even should exist as a separate country, because they don't produce anything for their own citizen, never mind humankind at all. There is no reason for them to exist.
Yeah, it's rather interesting you mentioned that, Sasha, because during the Korean War, when MacArthur launched his counteroffensive at Incheon Landing and cut off the North Korean army, and they were charging into the north, and they were approaching the Chinese border. And had MacArthur been willing to exercise a little bit more prudence and not overreach himself, they could have stopped at the just north of Pyongyang, because that is the narrowest portion of the peninsula. And you would have left North Korea, or what was left of it, as a little tiny rump state between a unified South Korea with a good portion of North Korea, and the Chinese would not have mounted a counteroffensive at that point, because they would have come up against a very well entrenched American and Korean army across the narrow neck of Pyongyang.
Yeah, I agree with that. And there is a talk about the possible war between Russia and NATO countries, and I always to say, let them first take Avdiivka. If they can take Avdiivka, then they can prove that they may take maybe Baltic republics, or maybe Poland or something like this. And it's so unlikely. I don't think that Poland, for example, will need NATO help at all. I think Poland is just almost waiting for Russians to attack it. They
Yeah,
will take it all the way to Moscow, and very
I think that I think you're quite right, and that you notice that the various NATO members, even though they're not acting as one organization necessarily, through a series of bilateral agreements with Ukraine, they're supplying aid, and Ukraine's challenge is simply, okay, we're getting a little bit of help here, a little bit of help here. And hopefully, if we can seize those $300 billion worth of frozen Russian assets, that's the icing on the cake, and be able to uh, successfully prosecute. I believe the stage is being set for a solidification of the Ukrainians' defense, and also for enabling them. I'm just waiting for them to throw that decisive counterpunch, which knock if it achieves an effective knockdown against the Russian army, and that this will set the stage for, like I say, contrary to everyone's expectations. Once the Ukrainians throw that decisive counterpunch, the war could be over by the end of this calendar year.
absolutely. I agree with you, and I think that we are all waiting and waiting, but the D-Day, is coming for Ukraine, and you are right. If Crimea, there are two ways to take control of connection between Crimea and the southern part of Ukraine, occupied presently by Russians. And another one is to destroy finally, once and for all, this bridge.
Yeah, the
Then
Kerch Bridge.
if that bridge will be decisively demolished, then Crimea is becoming just almost a territory waited to befall into Ukrainian
Right.
because there will be no other way to supply Crimea. I think
Exactly right.
it will fall. It will. They won't even be able to evacuate everybody there because if there is no Crimean bridge, how you evacuate people from Crimea? Building there is no sea possible. Can you evacuate by sea? If Ukrainians are so skillful to destroy Russian Black Sea fleet, how you evacuate people from Crimea? They will be all there probably. They will be waiting for Ukrainian to take over as soon as possible, so they will be able to survive because they don't have their own water, they don't have their own food, they have absolutely nothing there.
Yep. And that takeover will greatly simplify the Ukrainians' military problem. They'll be able to shift forces to the east, to be able to not only to further thwart any potential Russian offensive, but then they will have the potential, once they gain air superiority over Ukraine and over that portion of the battlefield in Russia. Once they gain air superiority, then the stage is set for another successful counteroffensive, which will drive the Russians out of Ukraine altogether. But I think they will be, once they regain control of Crimea, that will be a decisive, shall we say, the beginning of the end. Yes.
Well, and there are other signs that Russians are complete fools if they will not notice the agreements between Ukraine and United Kingdom, and it's bilateral agreement. It means that if not only that England will help Ukraine, but also vice versa. If England will need help, Ukrainians are going to provide help to England, just in case. And there are more and more new joint ventures to produce weapons for Ukraine, which involve Ukrainians actually. So there will be a sign that sooner or later such a production will be available in Ukraine proper as well. So Russians, there are a lot of things that are getting organized against them and very few for them, the way I see it. Very few. I don't know even what they have. Further mobilization, which most likely will happen after the election on March 27th. So Putin will be validated as the supreme leader. And then he will call what? A million people, 2 million, 5 million people. You can't even dress a million people. You just don't have dresses. So they have to, as often it happens, they are going and buying their own dresses, the Russian soldiers. not to be cold. They have to go out to stores to buy their own dresses. So this is pathetic. It's really pathetic. So if somebody thinks, like Professor John Mersmeyer, that it's a superpower and America has to befriend it as a superpower,
No,
what a
I mean,
calamity.
I mean, I mean, I'm sorry. That man needs to avoid laxatives at all costs.
Oh yeah.
If you catch my drift.
Absolutely. Jonathan, I would like to thank you very much for today's program. And I think we will be here, same place, same time on Tuesday, and hopefully we'll have even better news to report. Thank you very
Oh,
much.
I'm confident of it. Yeah, it's looking increasingly better. And you have yourself a wonderful weekend, Sasha. And
You
we will
too,
be looking forward
and
to
all
a
our
great show
listeners.
next week.
Thank you very much. Bye bye, everybody.